In this series, we're building an empire simulator based on travel speed, in which capitals have different specialties and take terrain according to what they can reach the easiest. The idea is to see if we can recreate real-world patterns to understand historical dynamics. In the last video, we discussed conquest. The winners were capitals with access to rich agricultural lands and with low costs for land travel. Think land powers like Russia or China. But something was missing. Some of the world's most expansive empires have based their power on sea travel. Think England or Spain. In this video, we will make two changes to the simulation. First, we will add a simple form of trade networks. Empires can now get power both from agriculture and control of trade routes. Second, we will make empires able to control the seas in which many trade routes pass. Will this make us able to simulate empires both of land and sea? Let's find out. What I want for the trade simulation is for it to reward capitals that are well connected, especially by sea. I also want it to be advantageous to control territory in which trade routes pass. If we combine those two factors, we should get something that rewards control over water lanes, especially important choke points on waterways like Öresund between Denmark and Sweden, the artificial waterways of the Suez Canal and the Panama Canal, the Straits of Malacca or Hormuz. We will still use the travel cost mechanics that are already in the simulation, but we have to make some additions. This new slider sets how many incoming trade connections each city has. If we set it to 3, each city will buy from the 3 cities that can reach it the cheapest. Often, those are the closest neighbors, but if a city further away has really low costs for travel, it can outcompete the others. So a city always has 3 incoming connections, if the slider is set to that, but can have many more outgoing connections. And then there is also this slider which discounts the costs of travel over water when cities select who to buy from. The lower it is, the more trade will pass over water. That's basically it. But how good is this model? Let's compare it with actual trade networks from this beautiful map on theageoftrade.com. It shows trade networks between the year 1000 and 1200. Let's take a closer look at East Asia. Do we get the Silk Road routes, for instance? Looking at the map, we can see that the general logic of our model seems sound. Cities are mostly connected to their neighbors. The parts of the Silk Road that went through the desert here does not pop up immediately, given that I usually set high costs of desert travel. But I mean, for good reason, right? Just look at what Wikipedia says about it. Water travel, however, seems rather limited, at least in quantity. Most routes are on land. And actually, when I talked about Spain and England earlier, they only got their global reach in the 16th century and onwards. In earlier periods, trade routes mostly hugged the coasts. Long-distance ocean trade only took off later. To represent the coastal trade networks, I have added a new type of terrain, shallow water. If we set costs lower there, we get routes that follow the coasts. I took the cities from this map and entered them into the simulation. Overall, I think the networks look kind of similar. Empires can now own shallow water, shown with the stripes here. Shallow water is also given a little agricultural land value to represent fishery. There are now 2 sources of power in the simulation: agriculture and trade. Agricultural power increases when you control fertile land. Trade power is calculated by checking the total number of connections and pass-throughs on the map. Trade power is each empire's share of the total trade in the simulation. These 3 sliders control a lot of the simulation. With the first one, we say how much that should be raw travel cost versus power. Set the slider to 0 and power doesn't matter. When we increase it, agriculture and trade starts mattering. The second slider gives a sort of bonus to attacking empires. The higher it is, the harder it is for smaller empires to defend their territory. And this third slider says how agriculture and trade should be weighted relative to each other. This new checkbox shows that conquered cities do stay in the simulation, even if they lose their territory, to keep the trade networks intact. If we uncheck the box, cities disappear completely when conquered. This new button checks the terrain in the radius around the capital, and the more of a particular type, the lower costs of travel the capital gets for it. So if we press it, we see that London, you can now click on cities, has low cost for water travel. Paris gets cheaper costs for planes travel, and Milan gets better at traveling in the mountains. Makes sense. We have plenty of sliders now, which means that there will be crazy amounts of configurations. It's frankly a bit overwhelming and I can't show you everything. You'll have to try for yourself. But after experimenting a ton with this, I think I found the most interesting approach that stays true to the aims of the project. The question we asked in the beginning was if we could simulate sea empires. The way we'll test this is to fix the power settings to reasonable values, start with a bunch of cities that all have the same travel values, and run the simulation once. This is Europe, with the most important cities that existed in the year 1400. Let's see what happens here. A fairly even result, which is natural as all cities are equally strong here. But the point was to see if empires could specialize in different ways. So what we'll do is let them mutate and evolve. All cities randomly gets better at one terrain, 10%, and 10% worse at another. Then we rerun the whole simulation again. Cities that did better than last time gets to keep their new settings, the others revert. It's a battle through multiple counterfactual histories for each city, but it allows them to find their own competitive strategies. We can then fast forward through the end states of each generation to see how the strategies develop. This is generation 90, which I thought was interesting. Land-based empires dominate, but there are some interesting variations. Copenhagen has managed to carve out a nice Baltic empire, and it has done so by being good at water. Over the generations, it sacrificed speed on plains and rivers to get better at the shallow water that it's surrounded by. Moscow instead focused on plains travel at the expense of forest. And Budapest went all in on river at the expense of everything else basically. But does the end result look like the real world? Well, not really. Here is the generation 100 simulated territory and the simulated between-state borders. Here are the real territories in 1400 and the real between-state borders. And here we have them together. Blue means real border not in the simulation, red means simulated but not real, and green is overlap. It's about 45% similar. But then I saw something fascinating. Comparing the likeness to the real world over the generations of the simulation, the borders actually became more and more like the real world. Interesting. I then ran 100 generations where I set the trade slider to 0, so trade didn't matter at all. And it turned out to be less like the real world. Also interesting. Had I stopped there, it would have been a compelling result, but I had to see whether it was just a fluke. And turns out it was. When I had done this exercise 10 times, there was no improvement over time and no extra benefit of trade. Shame. But did the trade mechanic affect the value of water? Well, yes. While the average travel speed for water was the same across these 10 runs, there were slightly more water specialists in the trade runs, and that's something. Let's take a look at Asia now, this time using cities from 1500, with trade. As the cities evolve their strategies, we see some interesting patterns. Something like Vietnam is taking shape over here, eventually being part of a large sea empire controlled from Xinjiang. And we can see India consolidating around a land-based empire from Cambay. But this does not look very much like the real 1500 borders. The fit is generally lower than it was in the Europe simulation. The real 1500 borders in Asia were dominated by the great Ming Empire, and we don't see that here. What did we learn? Overall, I think this new update gives a lot more flexibility in trying out different combinations of variables, and letting cities evolve their strategies in response to others was a nice analysis to do. With the new dynamics, I think we got more variation in the type of empires that evolved, which was the goal. Some specialized in water, others on land. In regards to trade, I wanted something simple, but in the end it probably needs to be a bit more complicated to really work. For starters, the current mechanic rewards connectivity, but there are no long-distance connections in it, despite those being the most valuable. The British or Dutch built their empires on global trade, and that's not in there right now. So, what's next? The aim of this project has been to predict borders, but the more complex the simulation gets, the less stable it is, like the real world probably. But it might also mean that it's time to do something else. Should I continue refining this simulation or do something different? I have ideas for other related simulations, going deeper into the mechanics of how states first arise, for instance. Let me know in the comments what you think, and see you next time.